Ladies and gentlemen, you are now entering the Decent Christian Talk podcast. Enjoy.
Decent Christian Talk, episode number 125. What's up, everybody? I'm Gabe.
I'm Josiah.
This is a show by the fans.
For the fans.
And we've got a great show for you today. We've got Ronnie Martin on the show today.
I am very excited about this because Joy Electric was one of my favorite bands growing up. In fact, I listened to some Joy Electric today just because. And it was their cover album. I don't know if you've ever listened to their cover album, but I listened to that today.
Yes, and for those of you that don't know, Ronnie Martin is back. He's releasing new music, and he just put out a new album called From the Womb of the Morning. The Dew of Your Youth Will Be Yours. It just released last Friday, January the 28th. It can be found anywhere where you listen to music, and it is an outstanding album. We'll talk a little bit more about that first. Before we head into the interview, I'm going to talk about our Patreon page. That's patreon.com/Decent Christian Talk. You can support our podcast for as low as $1 a month. That helps us keep the lights on, if you will. Helps us keep us rolling. Pays our bills. It helps us out a lot. Thank you guys so much for helping us out over the years, and we love to have you. We have bonus episodes that we load on there for those that subscribe to us through Patreon, and I'm sure that we'll talk more extensively about this release on the bonus episode, as well as maybe some of our Joy Electric memories that we'd like to share. And all good memories, but I have a few stories that just from some shows that I went to, and that were always great times. But you can check that out exclusively on patreon.com/Decent Christian Talk. But I'm done talking. Without further ado, let's head into our interview with Ronnie Martin. Well, man, thank you for hanging out. I'm really excited to talk with you today. I saw that you were releasing an album, and it's been, how long has it been? Like 15 years? How long has that been?
No, it hasn't been quite that long. I released the last Joy Electric album in 2012, and then I released another record with a different name about 4 or 5 years ago. But didn't get a lot of fanfare. Just kind of did it really kind of undergroundy, and so this is really the first thing in 8 years, I think.
So why did you decide, of all times right now, to put out something?
Well, I had talked to Jeff Cloud a few years back, and I said, hey, are you interested in working with me? And he said he was. And I said, well, I really want to do something under my own name, but I'm going to need some time to kind of process it and, kind of get there. And he said, yeah, that's fine. And so he was really enthusiastic. So that really made it to where I had a landing place for it when I started to, conceptualize it and figure out what I wanted it to sound like. And so I really needed to rebuild my studio and just kind of get my head in the place to be able to figure out what I wanted to do. And I finally got to that place in 2020, and the infamous 2020 year for us. And so I was able to find some time finally to hunker down write some songs that I really liked and start recording.
Yeah, I wondered how much the COVID pandemic had something to do with that. It seems like a lot of artists just kind of depends on. Some people like to write when they're on the road. Some people like to write when they're at home. What is that process like for you?
Yeah, I like to write on the piano at home. So I have a piano in my living room, and so that's how the process works for me. About once a year, I get about 10 to 15 songs that just sort of come to me in rapid succession, it seems like. And so I kind of get the structure of them, you know, in my head, and I just continue to play them out until they're at a place where I feel like it's time to come in here and start adding all the production. So it's really that simple for me. I don't come in here and start, adding all the noises until I feel like the verses and the choruses and all the riffs and all of that are in place. And so yeah, it's pretty straightforward for me, pretty simple.
Your style is quite unique, especially that Joy Electric style that so many people will call it. How did you come into that genre? Because it's kind of an unexplored genre, especially in Christian music. Well, how did you end up in that world?
Yeah, well, thanks for the kind words. It started a long time ago, because I've come to be an old guy now, but it started back for me in more of a formative, time for me would have been the late 70s and the early 80s. And, there was some surprisingly, very original and artistic, Christian bands that were doing, really, really avant-garde, very creative and original work, bands like Daniel Amos and, that were really pushing, the envelope at that time. And I think that's what influenced me musically at first, were bands that were not necessarily commercially successful in the Christian industry. And that was probably part of the reason why, is because lyrically and musically, they were really wanting to explore different worlds, different avenues. And that just really caught my attention. I was really fascinated with bands that were writing lyrics that I couldn't understand, and that were really speaking about things that I had to sit there and reflect on, and they weren't so obvious. And that really sparked something in me. And with the synthesizers, I was just a piano player. And when I started hearing all of these otherworldly sounds, and I had no idea what they were and where they were coming from, it caused me to explore that. And so by the time in the late 80s, when I started having the ability to buy some synths and learn how to program and figure all of this out, I had really become influenced by bands like New Order and, outside of the Christian sphere of things. So you had bands like the Pet Shop Boys and New Order, and which later turned into being influenced by, bands like Kraftwerk and all the original pioneers. And I just really, really got influenced by the early pioneer sounds of synthesis. And I just ran with it, and I just thought, I really love this. There's not a category for it really in this particular market. And, but what can I do? How can I take these sounds and these noises and write 3-minute pop songs with them? And that was the attempt. And that it just was the only thing that held my interest. In some ways it still is. So.
Yeah, and one of the unique things is you grew up with you had a brother that's an artist, Starflyer 59.
Yeah.
What was it? I mean, what was it like growing up in that house with Jason and you guys obviously branched out and did separate things, but what was that experience like growing up with him?
It was music was a part of our lives, because my mom loved music. My dad loved music as well. My mom loved music. She was the one that was a little more adventurous. So if you can visualize us, in a Ford Econoline, 12-passenger van, commuting to school in the morning. We had to drive quite a distance to go to school in the morning. So it was my brother and myself, and probably at this point, our little sister. And it would be my mom just putting in these 8-track tapes of, again, bands like I just talked about, like Daniel Amos and Keith Green and Larry Norman. And she was pretty adventurous in her tastes, you know, and she liked all kinds of different stuff. And so I think it was a matter of just growing to love music in that setting. And then, you know, I was definitely I was more drawn to music and writing songs and, you know, progressing in my skills as a piano player. Jason was kind of drug along into that. That wasn't so much his thing. And later on in our teen years, I really drug him into saying, hey, I'm going to start writing songs and recording. And why don't you be a part of this? And why don't you play some keys? Because we were both just keyboard players. And so it was more a matter of kind of pulling him in. And then that sparked something eventually. And we had a little home studio that my dad had built us. And at one point, it just became both of our studios because he became interested in learning how to record, learning how to write songs. And so, you know, I think as growing up together, it was, we were friends. We're only a couple of years apart. And so we shared a lot of similar interests. And we shared a lot of the same friends because we're so close in age. And, we're definitely different people for sure. We have very different personalities. And we definitely have different likes and dislikes. And that probably you can hear how that comes out in the music probably a little bit. But Jason, he really established himself. You know, he came into his own with Starflyer and, just became a fantastic songwriter and producer. And for whatever reason, we were both drawn to different styles of music. Oddly enough, we have the same influences. So if you were to ask him what his favorite two bands are, he would probably say New Order and the Smiths. And I would say the same thing. And he just kind of went to the Smiths side of things. And I went to the New Order side of things. But I always tell people, if you really were to break down the majority of our songs and just play them on a guitar or a piano, there's a lot of similarities. People can't hear it because of the musical style. But when it comes to the chord changes and the melodies, and you take our shared influences, I always tell people there's a lot of similarities. You just have to break it down a little bit. And some people just can't, they don't know how to do that. But it really is all there in the mix in some ways.
Yeah, I can definitely hear what you're saying there. Going back and listening to that re-release that was put out last year, that Morella's Forest 1988, I can just hear what you're saying about the Smiths and just how you guys were kind of in the same world at that time and then branched out. I can hear those influences even then. And that was one of my favorite things to listen to last year.
Oh, thanks so much.
But that takes us to your release that's coming out January 28th. It's called From the Loom of the Morning, the Dew of Your Youth Will Be Yours. That's a Psalm 110. Why did that psalm, what drew you to that psalm to write that particular song?
The song, I read the song, I cycle through the Psalms in my I do daily readings, daily Bible readings, and I'm always cycling through the Psalms. And the Psalms are beautiful, and they're very poetic, and they're very heartbreaking. And I've been struck over the last few years with just how much, artistic sensibilities are in the Psalms. And so I really wanted to base this record and really some subsequent records that I already have written. Really, I wanted to base it on what's called the wisdom literature of Scripture. So books like Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes. And this record in particular was influenced by the Psalms. And I just love the imagery. I love that title. I love the imagery that title evoked. And a lot of people wouldn't even know that was, from the Psalms. So there's something beautiful and sort of, obscure and abstract about the title. And because I love abstract lyrics, and it really just spoke to me. And I thought, what a great title. What a long title. I like long titles too. because they tend to be not quite as derivative as shorter titles, which there's a better chance of shorter titles having been used before. And so it just struck me. I went back to it over and over again, and I said, hey, if we can fit it, if we can actually fit it on the record because it's so long, it'll be great. So that's what I did. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you about reading through the Psalms. I think particularly a lot of it that never really hit with me as much hit me more so during this pandemic, especially like the brutal Psalms where you're like, it's like, why God, why are you doing this? And it seems like it hit in a different way. Has any of that happened with you?
Yeah, the Psalms have really become an anchor for me. It's how I pray in the morning, and I pray through the Psalms. And yeah, I think especially when you think back on, what the last couple of years have been, and so much unsettledness and so much political upheaval and all of the things that have come as the result of that. Yeah, the Psalms are like a balm to me. It's a way that we know we can express ourselves to God that is acceptable. And so when you read the psalmists and the way that they're grown and they complain, and like you pointed out so well, how long, O Lord, and when is this going to end? And when does this oppression, when is it going to cease in my life? And you realize that you can bring anything before the Lord and it's okay. And so that's really been helpful for me. And it's done something to really, keep me hopeful and optimistic, in uncertain times. And so yeah, like I said before, the Psalms are like an anchor for me for sure.
I'm interested because a lot of the people that you kind of maybe not toured with, but that kind of that tooth and nail culture, it seems like a lot of people in that world have, not everybody, but a lot of people have like left the faith. A lot of people have gone through deconstruction. And I know your path has gone on to actually like being in part of ministry. Why has that turned out different for you? What is that like? Why did that path end up taking you down that way as opposed to others maybe?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I think, it's so easy to become disillusioned with the church. And, there's been people have experiences, with the church and with Christians that are, we would say, don't line up with who Christ is. And so I think for a lot of people that have been wounded really badly, it's caused them to want to just, kind of turn, question everything, and turn and get as far away from it as possible. And that's really, there's a part of that that's really understandable because, people who are supposed to reflect the character of Christ, and then their character is anything but, reflective of Christ. And it really creates scenarios and abuses and wounds and damages in people's lives that cause them to think that Christianity must be false because I've been I've been the victim of the church or of Christians personally. And so I have a lot of compassion, a lot of empathy for that. And so when we talk about deconstruction and so for me, the Lord has just, I've had my own experiences. The Lord has just by his grace has preserved me through that. I've had my own, I've suffered through my own wounds, my own damages from the church. And I for whatever reason, the Lord has just continued to bring me back to himself, and, Christians can do a lot of damage. The church can do a lot of damage. But it's clear that, we live in a fallen world, and some of those things, can be expected. But it doesn't change who Christ is for me. And so the person that we read about in scripture, the beauty and the truth and the grace and the kindness and compassion of Christ. That's who I want to return to, regardless of the example and the treatment that I get from people that represent him imperfectly. I'm one of those people. And so for me, it's always been about, not basing my opinion of who Christ is based on who is representing him, and trying to find a separation from those two things, which is really hard to do. But the Lord has given me grace in that. At the same time, really understanding how badly some people have been damaged, and the tragedy of that. And my encouragement to them would be to, come back and experience who Jesus, actually is, not the version of him you've experienced through people that have misrepresented him. And I know that's a journey for some people, and I'm really sympathetic to that too. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all had those types of Psalms where like we talked about, crying out, and it's sometimes the journey is winding, and sometimes it's painful for sure.
Yeah.
Last question, kind of more lighthearted before we get out of here.
Sure.
You've been around the block a few times. If you could go back and talk to Ronnie Martin, 16-year-old Ronnie Martin, before you embark on all this music and all, the rest of your life, what would you tell yourself?
Oh man, what a great question. What a hard question to answer. I think I would, gosh, I think I would say, slow down, trust the Lord, reflect on your pursuits, and be very careful about those things that can become idols in your life and can even ruin some of the things that you enjoy and that have been blessings in your life, like creating music. So I think those are some of the things I would say. Trust the Lord with all your heart. Don't lean into your own understanding, and maybe allow your pursuits to become a little more sanctified. And for me, that was just, music was something that had become an obsession and an idol, and it just, it created some, just some harmful things in my own heart, in terms of, what I gave myself over to, in terms of making it my God, making it my everything. And that had an effect on me. The Lord has had to really do some healing in my own heart and my own soul, in that. And that's really why making this record was a joy, because I was able to do it with a little bit of a different heart, a little bit of a different mindset than I would have had, back in the old days. And so there was a joy in doing it with that, and I'm grateful for it. So yeah.
That's awesome, man. So like in 1999, one of my favorite shows of all time was Bleach, Miss Angie, Joy Electric. That tour came through my town, and it was one of my favorite shows that I've ever seen. And this has been so much fun for me to hang out for a little bit and talk with you. And I'm very interested to hear the rest of the album, and look forward to hearing the feedback from people on it.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it, brother.
That was our interview with Ronnie Martin. It's so fun to catch up with these artists that you kind of listen to over the years. Listen to Joy Electric since the mid-90s, and really have enjoyed his work on all his different artistic endeavors throughout the years, including Joy Electric, the Brothers Martin. Just really outstanding, and that continues with this release under his actual name, Ronnie Martin. This album called From the Womb of the Morning, the Dew of Your Youth Will Be Yours. It's a collection of songs that are written from some of the writings in the Old Testament, Psalms, Ecclesiastes. Really a great release. I mean, if you listen to Joy Electric back in the day, it's kind of an electro pop outfit, and this is more of it has a lot of similarities with Joy Electric, but it's more synth driven, synth wave, as I might call it. But this is an outstanding release, and it's going to be in the runnings for my 2022 releases of the year, I'm sure. What were some of your takeaways from the interview?
I really enjoyed just him talking about his writing process and also what he said to his younger self. I think I don't know. I think it's so interesting to hear just Ronnie talk because, like I said, it's been since the early 90s. I was a kid when I saw them live in concert, and now here it is 20 something years later, just listening to the stories and the influences. And I don't know, Joy Electric has always been one of those kind of oddball pleasures that they're so good. That's the only way I can kind of describe it. It's not something that everyone listens to, but at the same time, it was one of my favorites growing up. And I don't know, I enjoyed that very much. I enjoyed the interview very much. I listened to it a couple days ago, so I don't remember everything that was said. I'll listen to it again when the podcast comes out. But no, I'm excited to listen to this one for sure.
Yeah, Joy Electric was definitely a unique artist. Ronnie pretty much was Joy Electric, and Joy Electric was really unique and somehow figured out a way to fit into that tooth and nail culture, even though the tooth and nail culture didn't really have a lot of that type of music. They definitely had some electronic music, but many, and probably a lot of the reason there was because of Joy Electric. There was that unique sound that a lot of us called the Joy Electric sound, and
the mono synth.
Yes, and man, he was a lot of fun live back in the day. I just remember a lot of energy.
I remember their massive instrument, the mono synth on stage, where him and his brother would play it together. And then of course there was the Family Force 5000, probably like a Joy Electric 2.0 machine. I wonder if they actually drew inspiration from that, because they had a very similar massive thing that they used to play on stage. And I mean, speaking of tooth and nail, I really enjoyed your question where you asked just like the tooth and nail culture and how many people kind of that hit fame back in that era kind of, I wouldn't say devolved, but it like they
deconstructed
deconstructed was the word. Yeah. So it was really interesting to hear his take on that, because a lot of people, Under Oath, for example, they kind of, were they tooth and nail? Under Oath wasn't tooth and nail, were they? I don't remember. Anyway, I'm bad with record label names.
I think they were. Solid State,
I think they were.
Is tooth and nail.
But I've heard Under Oath's side of the story, pretty much just how hurt they were by people from the church. And then, I mean, it makes so much sense why someone would kind of revolt and rebel against that. And then Ronnie Martin's side of that, where he may have had some of the same issues. He didn't really go too deep into it, but he kind of learned to love God on his own, if that makes sense. So I think that was a really cool little portion of the interview, where instead of stumbling and falling, he kind of maybe stumbled and figured out how to stand on his own 2 feet, which I thought was really cool and pretty encouraging for a lot of people that are our age and maybe going through something similar.
I enjoyed the part of the interview that we talked about growing up with his brother, Jason, who ended up becoming the revolution that is Starflyer 59. And just those artists, both of their trajectories ended up being pretty different, but in a lot of ways the same. And seeing how they started out in the same household is a lot of fun to think about, especially when you go back and listen to that release that they did last year with Morel's Forest, 1988, that re-release that they did. But it's a lot of fun to think about those guys growing up, and it would have been fun to kind of go in the time machine and watch those guys create music together. But yeah, I
think
enjoyed
it's funny. Who do you think has the bigger cult following, Starflyer or Joy Electric?
I would say Starflyer, only because I think there's a bigger catalog. Like, I think Starflyer came before Joy Electric and has been releasing albums this whole time. And so they've kind of been, Jason has been a little bit, I mean, he's continued to
more
release
active
music. Yeah. And I think his
but
music,
they're two of the biggest cult followings, I think, in Christian music history.
yeah. Jason also has been, I would say his music is probably less niche than Ronnie's, but both of them definitely have a cult following.
It would be an amazing tour. I'm just fantasy booking here. You Starflyer, Joy Electric, and Kevin Max. Just get all the wild, crazy fans, like the oddballs, together and put them in the same room with the fiefdom, and just that would be a bizarre group to hang out with, but a fun group at the same time.
That would be fun for sure. But thank you guys so much for listening. If you haven't listened to this album yet, again, it's called From the Womb of the Morning, The Dew of Your Youth Will Be Yours. You can find it anywhere where you stream or download music. That
may be the most Joy Electric title.
For sure.
That's the perfect Joy Electric title.
But you can catch us anywhere you listen to music, like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. We are on Facebook. We have a Facebook discussion page. We may have a tournament of sorts coming up. I'm not sure yet. I have a couple ideas, but go to our group page on Facebook, Decent Christian Talk Podcast. We're also on Instagram, DC Talk Podcast, and we have a Twitter account that we sometimes still use, DC Talk Act 2. Thank you guys so much for listening. This is our first episode of 2022, and we will be back for more for sure.
Yeah, don't forget to tip your waiters and waitresses. Thanks.
Don't forget to tip your waiters and waitresses. Thanks.